Here is the voice of the working class, Rick Smith.
And welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is the Rick Smith Show. Thanks so much for being here. Today on the big program, lots to get to, lots to talk about. First off, happy May Day. Yes, May Day, the International Workers' Day. I know we don't celebrate Labor Day in this country till September, the end of summer when everything's going the other direction. The rest of the globe looks at May 1st as the International Workers' Day. And look, here in this country, there was a reason they didn't choose May 1st as Labor Day, because May 1st was about empowering workers. It was heaped in the blood of executed workers who were just demanding a reasonable workday. Back in the late 1880s, the average workday was sun up to sundown. You could have 16-hour shifts, being the norm 5, 6, 7 days a week. And workers under the banner of 8 hours for work, 8 hours for rest, and 8 hours for what we will struck for better conditions, better wages, better hours. Wages, hours, conditions. That's what people generally organize over. And this is our history. This is our labor history that's really never taught. I learned about none of this stuff in school. And we don't teach our children this stuff on purpose, because we don't want them to believe that they're, as a collective group, able to make better opportunities for themselves and others. We don't want working people to understand that they got power. And in every instance, that power has to be crushed. And you can go through our history. In fact, today I had a wonderful opportunity because I spent my May Day at a Teamsters event here locally that made it quite possible for for as workers organized, as things expanded, as opportunities expanded. Corporate America, with the help of government, crushed it. And this being one of those moments, as the workers in 1886 were on this day, saying, look, we demand better. We demand an 8-hour workday. The powers to be would have none of it. And eventually instigated what was the Haymarket affair, the riot. Someone throws a bomb, who knows who. People are injured. Police start firing into the crowd. People are killed. And they eventually arrest 8 people, the Chicago 8. 4 of them they execute. In fact, one of them wasn't even there, but didn't matter. Did not matter. And it opened up a couple of really interesting conversations for me today. And one of them being, as we talk about all the time, every day we're posed with these right-left scenarios. We're posed with, it's the red hat versus the blue hat. I guess because we understand the game. Everything is a horse race. Everything is a game. And it's posed to us in those terms. Critical thinking, finding common ground, that stuff is discouraged. It's rah-rah our team. And I happened to, as I was talking to someone, I remembered, the movie Hoffa. And I said, if you've ever seen the movie Hoffa, there's an incredible 30 seconds of film in there. And they did it on purpose. Because in the film, there's a scene with the bus strike in Cleveland back in the 30s, the RTA bus strike, where, Hoffa is leading all the workers into the courtyard area, into this giant, courtyard area. And, you see all the working people there with their wives and their children. You got reporters there. You've got all kinds of people, marching towards this company. And he's asked the question, are you expecting violence? And he says, I hope not. But, if it happens, we'll be prepared for it. And then it pans up to the window, the ivory tower, if you will. And there's the CEO. There are the corporate executives. There's the police chief, the local politicians, and they've all got their drinks in hand, and a very civil affair as they look down on the unwashed masses coming out and saying, hey, we demand better. We want better wages, hours, conditions, better opportunities for ourselves, our families. We want better communities. We want better. We demand better. And as they go back down to the crowd, you see the doors fly open, and out come the thugs, out come the hired muscle, out come the strike breakers, the scabs, out come the people who are brought there to beat these workers back into submission, to beat them back into their place. And at a certain point, it's just this jumble of this mass rumble of humanity. And at a certain point, you go, who's fighting who? They're literally just beating whoever's in front of them, and they're beating people bloody. They're hitting them with clubs, and and then it goes back up to the ivory tower, up to the window where the CEO, the local politicians, the police chief are all standing down there watching, with their disapproving looks and their head shaking. And then they close the curtain. They turn their back and they go back to their evening. Well, all of this chaos is going down in the bottom. All of this misery, all this violence, the bloodshed. And they go back to their evening. And you go, this is not just 1930s in Cleveland. This happens every day. Now, do we have these kind of mass rumbles today? No, because our police would never allow that. We've got much better crowd control techniques today, thanks to Iraq and Afghanistan. But this is one of those moments where, which side are you on? And it comes back to that for me. And as I was having this conversation today, every one of these battles is not about right or left, red hat, blue hat. It's not about I'm a Democrat or I'm a Republican. It's not about that. It's about which side are you on when it comes to the economic war that is going on right before us. To the fact that the war between labor and capital is always ongoing. And that capital uses our government against us always. And we're in this moment again. And this is where my frustration is, because, we're eating the outrage candy. We're angry at this group or that group. It's the immigrants. And look, that's not new. Not new. In fact, the Haymarket affair, as I go back and I spend a little time reading about it today and remembering some of the things I've read over the years, what came out of this Haymarket affair back in 1886 was widespread immigrant hatred. It's all these immigrants who are making things unlivable here by demanding that they get paid a wage that they can feed their children on, that they demand working conditions where they don't end up crippled or dead, where they demand to spend time with their families. How dare they? And you see a lot of this kind of the same hysteria thrown at us all the time. When it's, again, the person who's sitting in that ivory tower. Those people who are sitting up in that room looking down on us, the unwashed masses, the working poor. And what's happened in this country is we've made a lot of people really comfortable. Someone told me the other day, the average middle-class working person in this country is literally in the top 1% globally. And it's true. I mean, when you take in all of the billions of people on this planet, we're fortunate enough to be in that 1% of rarefied air globally. But here domestically, the average working person is struggling to keep up. Rents are going up. Cost of living's going up. Food, gas, all of this stuff going up. And why? Not because Joe Biden. Joe Biden is not the problem here. Although our political folks who want to make money off of it want us to believe that. It's all about the greed. I think about that French economist. It's greedflation. He's never seen anything like it in his lifetime. And you go, gee, never in your lifetime have you seen opportunists use a moment of crisis to their advantage. And this is where, understand, the idea of keeping us at each other's throats, still with the red hats and the blue hats. Our team has to win. And therefore, if our team has to win, your team has to lose. And we see this in every political decision. When was the last time you saw something that said, hey, we're going to help working people? We're going to help families do better. Especially coming out of our friends in the Republican Party. Because right now, whether you like it or not, they're the party who's attempting to undo the 20th century. They're the party that's attempting to tear down what was built by the greatest generation and return us to those days of 1886. Return us to those days of poverty and desperation for working people. That means you and me. That means the people who would be down in that crowd, whatever side you would be on, whether you're the strikers striking for better wages, hours, conditions, or the thugs who are just there to make a paycheck to beat them up. I think about the quote that's often attributed to Jay Gould. I could easily pay half of the working class to murder the other half. This is that moment. And as we see the strikes that are happening now and this resurgence of young people discovering what the labor movement is, discovering what solidarity is, discovering that they have power, we're seeing the moneyed interests doing everything they can do. And look, we're not going to tolerate as a country the kind of, or at least not yet, I still think it's going to happen at some point, but not yet, the kind of beatings that we saw back in the 30s and 40s. But we'll arrest people. We'll make their lives miserable because we're much more humane now. Back, in the 1850s, 60s, 70s, into that era, we were shooting people who struck. And then we started beating them with clubs. So we went from bullets to billy clubs. Now we got people with briefcases. Still the same outcome. Crush worker power. Crush the ability to fight for better wages, hours, conditions. Put people in their place. Just more civilized. I want to hear your thoughts. It is May Day, the International Workers' Day. I want to hear your thoughts. How did you spend your May Day? Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com to share that. Going to take a quick break. Right back. Stick around. You listen to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
We are AFGE, the American Federation of Government Employees. We represent 700,000 federal and D.C. government workers who are the vital threads of the fabric of American life. We support our nation's military. We take care of our nation's veterans. We protect our nation's borders. We respond to our nation's crises and natural disasters. We provide services to our nation's seniors. The American Federation of Government Employees. We work for America.
The phone lines are open. Give Rick a call at 1-866-416-RICK. That's 1-866-416-7425.
We are AFGE, the American Federation of Government Employees. We represent 700,000 federal and D.C. government workers who are the vital threads of the fabric of American life. We support our nation's military. We take care of our nation's veterans. We protect our nation's borders. We respond to our nation's crises and natural disasters. We provide services to our nation's seniors. The American Federation of Government Employees. We work for America.
Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
John listening at KTNF in Minnesota wrote, I think you missed the point. Eisenhower, and this is brilliant, because, as we were fighting for International Workers' Day, for Labor Day to be May 1st, he points out that Eisenhower, during his administration, declared May 1st as Law Day. And this is that, again, which side of the equation are you on? Are you on the side of the law and order and keeping people in their place, or allowing people the freedom, the real freedom, to do better, to fight for better? I love the fact that our Supreme Court is losing its mind on a whole bunch of cases and is moving us quickly back to an era where if you were hungry enough and desperate enough to work in poverty conditions for desperation wages, that was your liberty. It was liberty of contract. The Lochner era is what they called it. And it said, look, government can't do anything to make your life better. Sorry, you're on your own. And you can't do anything either because all the power lies in the hands of the employer. And that was, that's coming back. And the reason why it's important to remember the past, because the same things are going to happen only with better technology. And I point to an article written by Josh Idelson over at Bloomberg that came out today that said, look, and we talked about this a couple of weeks ago, that the White House is looking at how companies are using AI information to manage and surveil their workforce, and how we're so far behind on all of this, that there are very few places that have even addressed it, let alone have protections for working people in place. And that the AI revolution that is going to sweep across this country in very devastating ways for working people, no one's talking about. You know why? Because we're worried about transgender stuff. We're worried about who's going to what bathroom. We're worried about what little book that little Johnny's not going to read in the library. We're fed this stuff. So again, that we're in that pit, that massive humanity, that rumble of violence in humanity, of eating each other, half the working class literally tearing the other half apart. And why? So that all of the things that make those people in that ivory tower more. When Samuel Gompers, the founder of the American Federation of Labor, said, what does labor want? He answered the question, we want more. We want more of more schools and less jailhouses. More of the things that make life worth living. More of the opportunities to lead our better lives, and less of the things that tear us apart. We want more and better. Whereas our wealth class, our ivory tower folks, they just want more. More power, more control, more wealth, more to line their pockets with. And their insatiable appetite and greed and greed knows no bounds. So I look at what's going on here, and as Josh points out, there are a number of firms, Amazon being one of the big ones, who surveils basically everything that their workers do. Every keystroke, every rapid eye movement. As someone who drives a truck for a living, there's technology out there right now. And it's been here for a while. That while you're working, it is recording literally every single thing that you do. Because we do this stuff on truck drivers first. Because there's such a torn apart industry. Because we're hyper individual. We're the kings of the road. So we're easy to pick apart. Because there isn't really any unity. The knights of the highway are no longer. We're now just a whole bunch of people willing to slit each other's throats for pennies. Because that's what deregulation brought us. That's what breaking the unions brought us. That's what you're your own boss, hooray for you, and the heck with everyone else brought us. But there's technology out there that, while you're out there being the king of the road, it's recording your eye movements. It's recording everything you do, how many times you touch the brake pedal, what gear you're in, how fast you're going, how many times how long you're out of gear, you name it, everything. And it's been going on for years. And it is now expanding into office work. It's now expanding into warehouse work. It's now expanding into every facet of our life. And it's only going to get worse. Because we're still fighting over the outrage candy. We're still fighting over the stuff that is being fed to us. Now, as Josh points out in his article, there's only a couple of places that have bothered to do anything. For instance, Amazon. The State House passed a bill requiring companies like Amazon to provide their workforce with any data collected on them. That should be simple. We should have. And this is a much bigger question. How much data corporate America has on each and every one of us? Now, I was just talking to a friend the other day, and we were talking about some of the old movies from the 80s. And I think it was Blade Runner, where you walk down the street and every billboard, every window, shop window, everything was throwing advertisements at you specifically tailored for you. And how I remember at the time back in the 80s going, wow, that is incredibly dangerous. How do they know so much? How did they get all that? Well, we're now living it. Thank you, Google. You know, I Google something and 6 months later, I'm still seeing ads popping up going, hey, remember me? But we don't have control of our own data. And what happened to our constitutional right to privacy, to being secure in our papers? Yeah, never mind that. Also, California and New York, they passed legislation that would regulate production quotas. They've been doing that for the past few years. And again, AI is what's tracking all of this. Now, are we moving fast enough? No. And I love the fact that Bob Casey, the senator here from Pennsylvania, is starting, moving in the direction to begin regulating this, to begin what is already invasive, what is already, spreading like wildfire, beginning to try and rein some of this in. I fear too late. And I fear with the Supreme Court that is hell-bent on destroying any ability of citizens to oversee corporate America, that this goes by the wayside because of the Supreme Court. But we have to fight this because the AI tsunami is coming. And we're not prepared for it. I've read a lot about the era of the Industrial Revolution and how technology just made lives of working people incredibly desperate. And all of these technological advances throughout history have been for the benefit overall, but have harmed working people the most. It's always the person who lost the job at the buggy whip factory or at the vacuum tube factory, or the truck drivers who are going to lose their job because of self-driving trucks. It's always working people who take it on the chin, and there's rarely ever anything that helps them or makes them whole. And this is the world that we're in. This is, again, all of the my team wins, your team loses, politics stuff that's being thrown at us is not as important as being able to put food on the table and ensuring your children get fed. This is what I'm talking about. This big picture stuff that, see the elephant. Because all we're getting is the elephant's backside. And a lot of it's just a bunch of what dumping out on us. So the question is, how do we rein some of this stuff in? And I say it's about having the conversations I had with people today. It's about talking about issues. It's about talking about organizing and using the labor movement as that vehicle that reunites us back to the public square, that reunites us on common values. Instead of continuing to, shred us and tear us apart, we should find the things that bring us together. And I'm hopeful, feeding the kids, keeping a roof over their head, kind of important. I want to hear your thoughts. Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1919. That was the day May Day celebrators in Cleveland, Ohio were attacked as they marched to protest the imprisonment of socialist Eugene V. Debs. 1919 was a year of massive upheaval, marked by countless strikes and protests, riots, and bomb threats. But much of the country was still caught up in the jingoism of the war. Debs had just entered prison to serve a 10-year sentence. He had been convicted in Cleveland of sedition for an anti-war speech he gave in Canton, Ohio the year before. Thousands of trade unionists, anarchists, socialists, and communists marched toward Public Square in downtown Cleveland. Prominent socialist Charles Rutenberg led one of the contingents. He planned to address the rally in defense of Debs and also to promote his candidacy in the upcoming mayoral elections. May Day marchers carried red flags and American flags and banners reading, "Workers of the World Unite." Liberty Loan workers stopped them en route, demanding they lower their flags. Marchers refused and attempted to proceed towards downtown. Fighting broke out in the streets and lasted for hours until mounted police and army tanks charged the crowd. 2 were killed, at least 40 seriously injured, and as many as 120 were arrested. Rutenberg was charged with assault with intent to kill, though charges were later dismissed. Socialist Party headquarters were ransacked. The city immediately moved to restrict parades and socialist meetings and banned red flags. Local newspapers were quick to scapegoat immigrants and their supported Bolshevik sympathies for the riot. The attack in Cleveland served as an early warning of the Red Scare that would fully erupt by the end of the year. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com.
When public officials get themselves mired in the muck of corruption, they can always count on Senator Ted Cruz to issue a moral judgment. If the offender is a Democrat, he pronounces the corruption inexcusably grotesque. If it's a Republican, he wails that the offender is the victim. For example, Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas was recently caught, yet again, butt deep in judicial immorality, taking hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of freebies from a Texas real estate baron who has both a partisan and corporate interest in Thomas's court rulings. So, Cruz to the rescue. No judicial impropriety here, he squawks, for this is nothing but a diabolical plot by Democrats to smear poor Clarence. But Thomas is busy smearing himself, so Dems can just take the advice of Woodrow Wilson. Never attempt to murder a man who's committing suicide. From the start of his court tenure, Thomas has been a shameless seeker of personal gain, tucking untold sums from untold sources in the inner pockets of his judicial robes. He learned to hide his corruption in 2004 when he actually reported taking pricey gifts from a special interest, which got him widely condemned. So he reformed. No, he didn't quit taking gimmies, he just quit disclosing them. Thomas is a supreme grifter, but sadly he's not alone. Many recent justices have fallen from the pedestal of judicial integrity, cozying up to the moneyed interests. Gifts aside, we now have a hyper-partisan right-wing Republican majority taking their judicial opinions from those same interests, turning America's unelected third branch of government into an autocratic, plutocratic political agency. Then they wonder why their public approval rating and legitimacy are in the ditch. This is Jim Hightower saying, since they won't reform themselves, we must do it for them. To help, go to fixthecourt.com.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So some big news coming out of our U.S. Supreme Court. And this has been coming for a while. Look, we've been talking about this Chevron case for a couple of years now, knowing that this is on the horizon, that undoing what this decision did, basically, gutting our regulatory agencies and our ability to oversee what corporate America does. We knew this was coming, and now the Supreme Court has taken it, and one of the liberal justices, so I hate framing it like that, has recused herself because I guess she heard the case at the lower level. So now you're going to have 6 of the conservative justices and Elena Kagan and Sonia Sotomayor. So I don't see positive here. I don't see that this doesn't go the wrong way. But here to explain exactly what this Chevron deference is, what this case is, and what could come out of this, I've asked our good friend Renato Mariotti to come talk with us. Renato's a former federal prosecutor and the host of the incredible podcast, It's Complicated. We'll get links out on social media how you can check out the It's Complicated podcast. Renato, thanks for taking time for us.
Sure. How you doing?
I'm good. I don't want to get into all the legalese and all the jargon that you guys get yourself all involved in, but this is kind of a big deal because I've been talking about this for a couple of years now with people who are a lot smarter than I am and what this means. This is a big deal, isn't it?
It is. It's actually one of the most significant cases I think we've seen in a long time. Obviously, look, there's when something happens like a overturning Roe versus Wade, that grabs a lot of attention. But this is something that could have a massive impact on how our government works. A lot of the work that is done by the federal government, as you know, Rick, is not done by our elected representatives because let's face it, not Congress doesn't get a lot done. But it's actually by regulatory agencies, right? Everything from the FAA to the NLRB to the CDC, all sorts of things that matter to people listening to this program, whether you're in labor and you're concerned about labor relations, or you're concerned about your flights arriving on time, or you're concerned about the safety of the foods that your children eat. That is handled by regulatory agencies. And there's a decision that's been in place since 1984, since I was a very little boy, that essentially said that the courts defer to those agencies and how they interpret their own actions, and essentially allows them to put out regulations and have those agencies essentially be deferred to unless there's some clear message by Congress to the contrary. And Rick, Congress doesn't do a lot of bill passing nowadays, or law passing. And so that's given a lot of room for regulation. Of course,
Right.
we all know that what the right wing wants to do, which is turn the clock backwards, so to speak.
No, and this is one of these things where, look, even if legislators did write the perfect bill, they don't know everything. And a lot of times they don't know anything about the kind of things they're passing. So they can't know. This is deferring to people with knowledge, the experts. And I fear we're in a moment, Renato, where knowledge is hated, where smart people are looked down upon. And this kind of thing will be celebrated, because I'm looking at the social media going, we're free, we're going to be free. And I'm going, what are we free from?
Right. It's the same attitude that had people attacking Dr. Fauci and the CDC, right, when they were imposing regulations, has people attacking the SEC when they're trying to regulate the financial markets. It's that same instinct. And it's dangerous because it's married here with a sort of Federalist Society streak of making it harder for government to do anything effective, right? Which is old school conservatism, sort of like the sort of knee-jerk reactionary Fox News anti-woke stuff combined with this right-wing, Federalist Society thing, which what the result's going to be, as you and I know, is that the NLRB isn't going to be able to issue guidance. The SEC is not going to be able to regulate our financial markets. The FDA is going to have more trouble making sure our food and drugs are safe. All the things that we all rely on are going to be harder for those agencies to do.
Yeah, but are we surprised by this? I mean, I'm looking at the court now, and they're, like, as you pointed out, they're Federalist Society appointees. That's who they came from. A lot of them, still the buy into this original intent stuff. So this is ideologically right in their ballpark. If it's not exactly enumerated in the law, then it doesn't exist, and no smart person can ever interpret it, just like you do with the Constitution. There's no interpretation. It has to be written exactly the way it is, or it doesn't exist. It's that kind of black and white thinking that I think not just dangerous in everyday civilization, but in regulatory oversight.
Well, people always presume they focused on these sort of high profile hot button issues. But what they don't recognize is when the court changes, the people are focused on things besides courts and judges usually. But what they don't understand is that this is the sort of area, things like this, where who you have in the Supreme Court makes a big difference. Because at the time our nation was founded, there were no regulatory agencies. There was no FTC or FAA or CDC. None of these things existed. That's something that's a creation of a more modern era of our country. And so how and whether you defer to those agencies and how much authority you give them is something that nobody who was thinking back in the 1770s, 1780s, 1790s was not even in part of their imagination. And so there's a lot of latitude for judges and justices to make law, so to speak, through their rulings. And here's an example of something that I think we take for granted. Okay. 1984 is when the Chevron case was decided. You mentioned Chevron at the beginning. That's what this is all about. 1984. Okay. That was, I don't know, almost 40 years ago now. It's a long time that people have made and have had kind of expectations about how government works. And that may all change because of some Supreme Court justices.
No, and I fully expect it to change. Do you have any hope that this doesn't get overturned?
No, I think it's just a matter of how and what it looks like. In other words, it's sort of like Roe versus Wade. When once the court was where it was, I mean, I had said as soon as Kavanaugh got put on the court, appointed to the court, I said this means the end of Roe versus Wade. I'm sorry to report that I was correct about that, but I didn't know at the time whether there'd be an incrementalist sort of rollback of Roe versus Wade, death by 1,000 cuts, or whether it was going to all happen at once, which is, of course, what happened. And I don't know here whether there's going to be just a flat out rejection of Chevron deference entirely and sort of basically rolling back the authority of agencies, or whether they sort of modify it a little bit around the edges, that sort of thing. So I think it's really just a matter of how much change there's going to be.
Yeah, and that's what we're going to have to wait to find out. And I always fear the worst because they've shown me that's what they're willing to do. You brought up the Dobbs decision. There was the Janus decision. They always seem to go toward let's rewrite the 20th century. You're listening to the Rick Smith Show here with Renato Mariotti, former federal prosecutor and host of the It's Complicated podcast. We'll get links out on how you can take a look at his podcast. I got to get your thoughts on what's going on in Florida. I don't know if you've been paying attention, but today DeSantis signed 3 what he's calling anti-crime bills, and one of them is they would make child molesters eligible for the death penalty. The Supreme Court's already said that unless someone's died, that the death penalty's off the table. But he's pushing this. This being one of those. Another one being enhanced. They said enhanced criminal penalties for selling fentanyl or fentanyl analogs that look like candy, and also this is the one I really want to ask about. They want the Florida Supreme Court to develop a uniform bond schedule, and how do they put it? To forbid a person from being released before his or her first court appearance if charged with a violent or heinous crime. Does that happen?
Not really. It doesn't happen much. It's a pretty rare. It would be a very, very rare circumstance where that's the case. There will be some edge cases. Okay. I mean, I prosecuted a person, an older lady who was mentally ill who tried to rob a bank. Things like that, but it's pretty rare where something like that's going to happen. I have to say, all of that, Rick, seems to me like trying to use and shape the criminal justice system to get more airtime on Fox News. It's really a use of the criminal justice system to score political points, and I just don't think that's the way we should go about criminal justice.
No, when I first saw this story, I go, look who's running for president. Because that's what this really is all about. Now, look, the Supreme Court's not going to allow them to kill child molesters. Although, look, as a parent, I get parental justice. I get that, but not state-sponsored murder. Yeah, I'm just not there. But this is all that stuff that reeks of Fox News. We're letting the violent criminals walk on the streets. We're catching them and releasing them. And I'm going, everyone I've known who's done this stuff, that's not happening.
Criminal justice has been something where, and it's been decade after decade, there's been a politicization of prosecution. And the way that we handle criminal justice in this country should be outside of that. And we've always gotten into trouble when we've tried to use politics to determine whether and how people should be prosecuted for crimes. It's how we ended up with the, quote, war on drugs and over incarceration, for example. It's ironic because on Fox News, they're always railing against what they call the Soros-backed prosecutors in their mind, who are pursuing there's some sort of quote woke, I don't even know what that means, agenda. And this is basically them doing what they're trying to criticize others for doing, which is using criminal justice and people's lives, okay, to pursue an agenda. I don't have any. I don't have any love for child molesters either. To be very blunt, I prosecuted people who did that, and I've had victims of that in my family. It's absolutely heinous, heinous crime. But I think we should let judges decide punishments. Judges and juries ultimately have a role in punishment, not politicians. I think that's the better way for it.
I'm glad you framed that like that, because one of the arguments I make is as you're making these hard, fast, these absolutes, it takes out any part of compassion. It takes apart any bit of the criminal justice system being for rehabilitation. It's all about crime. It's all about punishment and retribution, and I don't know that that's a positive.
Well, it's a challenge, okay? Because I think that criminal punishments are a challenging thing. In certain circumstances, for example, there's a big debate over mandatory minimum sentences, which in general have often resulted in over incarceration because prosecutors will use those as a tool to put a stiff sentence on someone who may not deserve it. But in certain circumstances where judges are not sentencing, for example, child pornography is an area where sometimes judges have given too much of a break to people engaging in that. I can see the need for that. But I will just say that I think that the punishment of someone is one of the most serious decisions that a judge can ever make. And it's best made by a judge who sees the person in front of them, who has all the facts and circumstances, not only about that case, but about the person's life, who they're sentencing. And I don't think it's appropriate for us to be using the lives of people to make political points. It's just too important for that.
No, I'm right there with you. But here's the thing: on the other side, this is a big winner on the right with the red hat crowd.
Sure.
Because it's we're being tough on crime. When you go, I'm sorry, the death penalty doesn't deter crime. Statistics show it doesn't. It's just about we're going to exact retribution. And I'm against the death penalty for one reason, and that's it's permanent. There's no oops, we made a mistake. There's no going back and undoing it. And look, are there people who I think deserve it? Absolutely. Someone touches my kid, there may be some street justice there, but I'm not in favor of a state-sponsored system that does this, and especially using it for political gain like I think DeSantis is doing.
Well, the first prosecutor I ever worked for was Pat Fitzgerald, a very famous prosecutor. And he, I think, rather famously made the argument within the Justice Department that his opposition to use of the death penalty by the Justice Department was just the amount of resources it takes. In other words, it takes more resources to prosecute a death penalty case with all the appeals and everything else than it does far more than it does a sentence of life in prison. And it's just not a good use of prosecutorial resources. Personally, I could see why in certain extreme cases the death penalty might make sense. If Osama bin Laden was caught in U.S. borders, I could understand that. But that's not what we're talking about here. What we're talking about is a politician who sees his poll numbers not where he wants. He's trying to get some free polls, a boost in the polls at the expense of people's lives. And I just think that, like you said, it's a very dangerous thing to be doing.
Yeah, for me in this moment, it reeks of opportunism and desperation. I mean, this seems like that last Hail Mary kind of, hey, I need to save my campaign. What can I do to rile the base and get them around to me? And this is it. So I'm curious, do you think this is going to work? Do you think this will revive the DeSantis campaign since he seems to be taking beatings in other arenas?
Yeah, I don't see it. I mean, one thing that's happening, by the way, is the Trump campaign spending all the money that they hoodwinked from their supporters. They're spending it against DeSantis years before the race, right? And I think, the reality is DeSantis is trying to have his cake and eat it too. Be on the sidelines, not run for president, while trying to sort of surreptitiously run. It's not working for him. And let's face it, I think the far right wing's pretty captured by Trump right now.
No, at this moment, it's Trump's to lose. And we'll see how that plays out. But Renato, as always, I appreciate the insight and your expertise. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
our good friend Renato Mariotti. Make sure you check out the podcast. It's complicated. We'll get links out on social media, how you can take a look at that. Gonna take a quick break. Right back with your thoughts. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
The phone lines are open. Give Rick a call at 1-866-416-RICK. That's 1-866-416-7425.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1886. That was the day that workers throughout the United States walked off their jobs in a coordinated, planned effort and demanded the 8-hour day. What made this strike truly revolutionary was that the workers were not asking for reduced pay for reduced hours. They wanted their pay level to stay the same. Chicago labor activist Alan Parsons explained this that March for the Chicago Daily News, saying, quote, "The movement to reduce the work hours is intended by its projectors to give a peaceful solution to the difficulties between capitalists and laborers. I have always held that there were two ways to settle this trouble, either by peaceable means or violent methods. Reduced hours, or 8 hours, is the peace offering. Fewer hours mean more pay. Reduced hours is only the measure of economic reform which consults the interests of the laborers as producers, which can only be acquired by possessing and consuming a larger share of their own project. This would diminish the profits of the exploiters." That first day of May, tens of thousands took to the streets in Chicago, and an estimated 300,000 protested across the nation, marching for the 8-hour day. The strike met with early success, but then 3 days later, an unknown person threw a bomb at a workers' rally in Chicago's Haymarket Square. The government crackdown against the 8-hour movement was quick and harsh. 8 men stood trial in Chicago for the bombing. 4 were martyred despite a lack of evidence tying them to the bomb. But the idea of the 8-hour day was not so easily crushed. It spread not only in the United States, but across the world. Now, more than a century later, May Day, this day, is the International Workers' Holiday. Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.
So I go back to the whole DeSantis thing and the death penalty. And look, conservatives have always used that as their rallying cry. See how tough I am? Look at me be tough on crime. And I look at this DeSantis thing, and honestly, the first thing I thought of as I'm reading through this, and I saw a couple of the videos of his speech with the big American flag behind him like he's Patton or something. I'm going, tell me you're running for president without telling me you're running for president. This is riling the base up. This is trying to get them, say he's Mr. Law and Order. He'll crush those others. And the problem with a guy like this is eventually you or me or us become the others. How far down this path until it's your kids or mine or us, between the Buford T. Justices of the world, with the iron fist of the law come down on top of us. Now, as I said, I'm against the idea of the death penalty. There's a bunch of reasons, but the number one is it's not foolproof. We have executed innocent people, and there's no going back on that. And as a working class guy myself, if something were to happen in my life, who knows? I know I don't have the resources to defend myself. And as I think Renato pointed out, it's a matter of resources on the state side as well, because they spend a lot of money, but they don't seem to run out of it as fast as an average working class person. I look at the difference between races in using the death penalty. That's a problem. There's a lot of inequities in the system that you go, I don't know. I'm not there. And I know if it were you or your family, you would be, and this is where I come back to, if it's my kids, I understand vigilante justice. I do. I'm not advocating for it. I'm not suggesting you go do it, but I understand it. that should not be how we run our government. And, I've had these conversations for a very long time on this topic, and my mind has not changed. Also, there is the fact that spending life in jail is no picnic. Ask the insurrectionists. Ask Marjorie Trainwreck Green and Go-Go Gomert and the rest of them who go visit their heroes in jail in Washington how wonderful the jail system is. And this again goes back to that image that people have of these January 6th insurrectionists. They believed jail was like Club Med. You got 3 meals in a cot, and I can watch cable TV, and I can work out all day long, and it's utopia. It's a good thing. Too good. We need bread and water and misery. Well, they're now in jail and going, it wasn't what they thought it was. And look, our media structure, they're falling for it because they were fawning all over DeSantis in his speech, and he got what he wanted out of it. He got a lot of attention. Look at me being presidential. Look at me with the big giant flag behind me and how wonderful I am. And look, and I can make quips, like the old Gipper about how tough we're going to be. Yeah, our media being our media because it's all about the clicks, man. And speaking about all about the clicks, CNN doing what CNN does. Evidently, they announced that Donald Trump's gonna participate in a town hall next week in New Hampshire. And thanks for ruining my birthday. On May 10th, my birthday, the CNN's gonna have Caitlin Collins, the anchor of CNN This Morning, hosting this town hall, I guess, of Republicans and undeclared voters, they're saying. And all this is going to be is an hour or two of Trump just rambling on about, whatever it is he wants to ramble on. It's like a giant commercial. But they do it because, well, it's about the money. They are now coming around to the Rupert Murdoch. Trump is good for business. Or the Les Moonves. I know he's bad for democracy, but he's good for CBS. He's good for our bottom line. And I keep coming back to how do we break this cycle? Because the outrage that they keep shoveling down our throats keeps us from solving any real problems. The media was all abuzz over DeSantis today. Did we talk about anything that's going to make your life better? Did we talk about anything that's going to help your kids go to college or any of that? See, I believe government is the tool that we use collectively to do the things we can't do individually. We want to educate our children. We want to send them to college. We want to, invest. We want infrastructure. We want military. We want health care. These are things that we should be fighting for. And yet, all we're doing, and thanks to the least among us, we're focused on the show, on the circus, on what's tearing us apart. And it's bread and circus. Or as I say, reality TV and Cheetos. And that's what our politics have turned into. A sad reality TV show. Want to hear your thoughts? Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. If you miss any portion of the program, make sure you grab the podcast wherever you get your favorite podcasts. You'll find ours. Right back.
The Environmental Protection Agency will call for restrictions on all future and existing power plants that run on coal or natural gas.
Biden EPA to launch new landmark effort to limit carbon pollution.
Climate change isn't a future problem, it is a current problem.
Earth hits grim new records for global ice loss and rising seas. Plus,
environmental justice will become the responsibility of every single federal agency. I mean, every single federal agency.
President Biden boosts environmental justice.
All of those boosts and more straight ahead from BradBlog.com. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
Will we step up to our ambitions? Will we stand together to meet the great challenges we have? Will we preserve our planet for future generations?
No, I don't think so. This is your Green News Report. Okay, Desi Doyen, big news from the EPA this week.
Oh, yes, indeed. As we go to air, the Environmental Protection Agency is on the verge of proposing new rules requiring the nation's power plants to cut their carbon emissions.
How quickly can the Republicans write a lawsuit against that?
Oh, instantly.
Yeah.
It matters because electricity from coal and natural gas-fired power plants is the second largest source of greenhouse gas emissions in the U.S. after transportation. If adopted, the new draft pollution standards would require utility companies to capture nearly all carbon emissions from their smokestacks by 2040, leaving the companies to determine how, either by switching to clean renewable sources like wind and solar, or by using costly new technology to capture emissions from their smokestacks.
Or by filing a lawsuit.
No commercial power plants in the United States use carbon capture technology right now, and the new rules are expected to trigger an immediate challenge from Republican-controlled states in the Supreme Court, which blocked a previous Obama-era effort.
Of course.
Meanwhile, the Earth broke grim new records for melting glaciers, rising sea levels, and ocean warming in 2022, caused primarily by the burning of fossil fuels. The World Meteorological Organization's annual State of the Global Climate Report, released on Earth Day, confirms that the past 8 years were the hottest 8 years in the instrumental record. Last year, the oceans hit a new all-time record high for heat content. Antarctic sea ice fell to its lowest extent on record. 60% of the ocean surface saw at least one marine heat wave. Average global sea levels also reached record highs, and the rate of sea level rise itself has doubled since 1993. Additional evidence that man-made climate change is accelerating. The report also found, quote, off-the-charts melting of the world's glaciers, and that matters for millions of people around the world who rely on glacier meltwater for drinking water and food production.
Off the charts melting.
Yep. Here in the U.S., about 1 in 3 people in the United States breathe polluted air that harms their health and shortens their lives. And it's primarily from gas-powered vehicles and industrial plants. That's according to the American Lung Association's annual State of the Air report, which found that increasing wildfires, drought, and inequality have stalled improving air quality efforts, with low-income and communities of color disproportionately affected.
It also found that House Speaker Kevin McCarthy's hometown of Bakersfield is the most polluted city in the entire United States.
Yep, and McCarthy has proposed repealing clean energy provisions in the Inflation Reduction Act climate law. But the vast majority of Americans support federal government action to address climate change. According to new Pew Research data, 70% of Americans want the government to prioritize renewable energy sources like wind and solar over expanding production of fossil fuels. But there's a deep partisan divide. 80% of Democrats consider climate change a major threat. Only 23% of Republicans do.
Lucky they got gerrymandering.
President Biden criticized McCarthy and Republicans when he signed an executive order creating the Office of Environmental Justice in the White House to ensure that poverty, race, and ethnic status do not lead to worse exposure to pollution and environmental harm.
Nice.
Environmental justice will be the mission of the entire government, woven directly into how we work with state, local, tribal, and territorial governments. This is an order that directs the federal agencies to address gaps in science and technology.
Nice. About time.
And finally, the U.S. Supreme Court on Monday rejected an attempt by Big Oil to delay climate liability lawsuits brought by U.S. cities and states trying to hold oil companies accountable for costly damages caused by man-made climate change. Big Oil was trying to move the cases to friendlier federal courts, but the Supreme Court declined to bail them out on that.
Nice. Are you okay, Supreme Court? For much more on all of these stories and the ones we couldn't get to today, check out our website at greennews.bradblog.com. Find, follow, and share us planet-wide on the Facebooks, Twitters, and Mastodons at Green News Report.
tired of think tank approved corporate news and commentary? Are you tired of CEOs telling you what to think, who to hate, and who to vote for? Well, welcome to the Rick Smith Show. We don't take orders from some boardroom, and we don't do focus groups or talking points. We don't work for them, and we never will. I'm Rick Smith, and I work for you. Join us daily at thericksmithshow.com and download the podcast and never miss a minute.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So it's being reported we're on the brink of a writer's strike. Going to happen, I guess. The time is ticking. And this is, this is one of those moments where I go, I remember the writer's strike that brought us the reality TV shows that they used to try and break the unions. This is, again, why we need to be supporting these folks. And it's mind-blowing in an industry that's making such enormous wealth that, again, they don't want to share. But here to share some thoughts on what's going on and what we should know as this happens, I've asked Michael Sonata to come talk with us. Michael's a labor reporter at The Guardian. Michael, thanks for taking time for us.
Of course, thanks for having me.
So what's going on? What do we know at this point about the writers? And is there going to be a strike? Is that a for sure thing? Do we know yet? Where are we?
The deadline is midnight tonight Pacific time, so we'll know in a few hours if they reach a last minute deal or not. So I mean, basically from what we've seen, they're still kind of far apart. The movie companies don't seem to want to offer the gains that the union and workers are asking for, and that's what's at stake here is with everything that's transitioned to streaming over the past few years, pay for writers in Hollywood for TV and film has declined, stagnated, and they've the studios have made all these different tactics with short order, shorter seasons on shows, hiring fewer writers, expecting one or two writers to do the work of numerous people, and coming up with loopholes to pay more writers than what we've seen the past decade, getting the basic minimum from the contract, so they're not getting paid based on seniority or experience. And the common misconception is that if you're writing in Hollywood, you made it, you're successful. So and there was a story that came out that showed The Bear on FX. One of the writers for that had to take out a loan to get his talks to go to the Emmys, and was just had no money, and that's kind of what the negotiations and fight are about. It's not a sustainable career for people who are seeing success in getting successful TV shows and things like that. And what we've seen from these big media companies, their executives are getting huge salaries, they're making tons of profit, and they're putting a ton of money in aggressively expanding and merging all these different media companies and all these different services, but they don't want to pay for the people who are creating the content. There's no shows if no one's there to write it and guide it along. And one of the funny stories from the last writer's strike that I read in the past few days is Daniel Craig was talking about how during the 2007-2008 writer's strike, the last time writers went on strike, it kind of ruined Quantum of Solace because he was stuck doing the rewrites and stuff for that because they got the script 2 days before they went on strike, and he said he swore and said it messed up the production, but he's like, I'm not a writer. This was a mess, and it's kind of funny getting that kind of that back scenes view on how important these people are and the kind of work they're doing to guide along the things we watch every day.
It's important to be able to deliver the line, but you got to have a line to deliver.
Yeah.
No, I hope this again as I hope for all strikes. I hope this is short. I hope this does what it's supposed to do and gets people. It's that jolt that gets people back to the table and negotiating in good faith. And I hope these writers get what they earn, because that's ultimately what this is about: the wealth that their labor creates being compensated at a fair rate. Now, I talked to my friend Tom Arnold, who just said the other day, if there's a writer's strike, he's coming back on the show. So we're going to get evidently we're going to get Tom, if this happens, back to support these workers. I got to get your thoughts on a story you wrote the other day that caught my attention. It was the main reason I reached out. Because one of the frames I get from people all the time, Michael, is that we don't need those unions anymore. Because we're so much better than this, and we don't do the kind of menial manual labor that unions are supposed to be known for. And yet you got a piece out now that you've got doctors who are organizing at an incredible pace. Tell me how's this going, and what are we looking at down the road as these residents and these doctors are going, hey, we do need some protections, we do need some say.
A lot of it's coming out of these resident doctors. So once you get out of med school, you get placed into residency for 3 years until you take your boards, and then you're making the typical doctor salary, or that's how it's supposed to go. But in those 3 years, you're working at a hospital, a teaching hospital, and so during the pandemic, hospitals kind of relied, and threw those workers really to the wolves, so to speak. They were meant to deal with all the surges and all the different difficulties and challenges with that, and they obviously didn't have a say in how that was enacted or instituted in their hospitals. So basically they were taken advantage of and utilized as hospital management, which were either safe in their offices or at home, making those kinds of decisions. So it kind of I think exposed the disconnect that a lot of these big hospitals have, where the rules, the working conditions that these workers are working under are dictated by people that don't know what's going on, or don't deal with the patients, don't see what the issues are, and almost all the doctors I spoke to were said, we're the first ones that the patients see when we come out. We know what their issues are, and we have our own issues, and pay is another issue, because a lot of these hospitals are in big cities, so they might be making 80,000-90,000 for their residency, but if they have to live close to the hospital because they're working 80 hours a week, then they're paying top rents in some of the biggest cities. Like I spoke with residents at Stanford and UPenn, and in Boston. Those places are expensive, and they're facing, unfortunately, the typical union busting that you see from employers. Some of it was pretty comical. I linked. There was a PowerPoint presentation, an anti-union one. They had the typical arguments. All of it's complaining, saying we want a direct relationship. We do better with the direct relationship. Unions will be bad for you, type of thing. The scare tactics. It might get worse. It's just like that. If it was worse, you wouldn't be opposing it. So it's just ridiculous. And what's good, what was optimistic about it is a lot of these union elections, even one that I talked about, George Washington University, they won their union election by a landslide. I think maybe a few hundred voted for it, and I think 20 or so voted against it. So I think that shows, not only the what is going on in this country in terms of people kind of waking up to see, like, okay, work is kind of brutal. What can we do to improve this aside from, quitting? And, we're seeing Starbucks workers stand up against a billionaire who has shown clear disdain for his workers and the constant union busting and labor law violations that that company is engaged in. I think it was a really interesting story just because it's not something you hear about. It's not something you're going to see on the news, or if people are talking about unions, like you said, people like to claim that we don't need them anymore, that are outdated, which is nonsensical. But this clearly shows that workers, and especially these people are working alongside nurses, where I think they have a unionization rate of around like 23-24% right now, which is not, it could be higher, but it's more than double the unionization rate in the US right now. So yeah.
No, it's interesting though, because no matter what you do, whether you're a doctor or you're working in a warehouse, it does come back to wages, hours, conditions, and that's what they're fighting for. But it's interesting to me that as these doctors are coming around to, hey, we have to have representation. We want to make our conditions better. I look at what some states across this country are doing in rolling back child labor protections, and you go, there's just this imbalance of sanity that's going on. While again, you've got these doctors who've come to the reality that individually they can't make their lives better. They've got to do it collectively. You've got these states going, hey, we need to fill the void of cheap labor. And what better way to get that cheap labor than get the kids into the workforce? Newt Gingrich joked about firing the union janitor and letting the kid in the school clean the bathroom. This is where they're moving towards, isn't it?
Yeah, it's really, it's ridiculous how these laws kind of like either have secretly without much attention, or what happened in Iowa, it's not passed yet, but passing the Senate, one of the big issues were the Republicans pushing that legislation refused to speak about it during the Senate hearings, and that was because they didn't want to say anything that would be used against them in the Iowa State Supreme Court overturning the legislation. So, I've cited some of the arguments and claims for that proponents of that, and it's all industries like, oh, this is going to expand opportunities, but this is not something that is an organic or grassroots thing. No 14-year-old is like, I gotta work at these jobs. No one is advocating for that. It's industries, it's wealthy employers, wealthy business groups, and conservative think tanks that have come up with ways to basically draft state legislation and sneakily pass it. And it's an all-out attack. It's popping up in numerous states. There's been a few bills proposed at the federal level, but I don't think and it's scary because we do have a Republican Congress now where if they wanted to, I don't know if they are willing to put that up for a public debate, because obviously it wouldn't go well for them, because I think the average American can clearly see why we have child labor protections to begin with. The fact that these child labor violations have been rising over the past few years. We've had some big investigations come out that are just, harrowing and kind of ridiculous and reminiscent of like, oh, this is something that, you've seen those photos 100 years ago of like the little kid chimney sweeper, or like little kids in the factory. It's like they're pushing towards, slowly ticking towards back that way.
Oh, come on, Michael, you're just being hyperbolic. That's not what the bill says. We don't want kids on the kill floor of the meatpacking plants. We just want them on the kill floor of the meatpacking plants to clean the machinery. They're not actually killing anything. And we're going to give, companies a liability shield if we partner up with the schools, and we'll call it an apprenticeship program of doing cheap labor, because the kids want this. The kids are pining for some responsibility, Michael.
Yeah, that is it's really the arguments they're making, and what the concerns and dangers about this is if you allow that kind of leeway, then what's next? And they could say, oh, they're already cleaning the plants. Why can't they work on the meat assembly line? And things like that. And, we know based on the worker injury and worker fatality data that younger workers have higher rates and risks of injuries. Looking through, I've looked through the OSHA, fatality website, and I've, in the article, I spoke with the mother who, the kid was 18 and his father was still at the job site, but it's, the logging industry is one of the most dangerous industries still in the country. They're repeatedly, year after year, the most workplace, the highest fatality rates of any industry in the country. And she spoke, she's very eloquent about why this is a bad idea, why they're opposing it, and pointing out that the senator who drafted this bill, a senator from Idaho, dismissed it. He had nothing constructive to say. He's like, oh, that's too bad, but we want to still do this anyways, because you see that they tout that who's supporting this bill. Oh, it's the logging, the industry association and the industry, and that's who they want. They want the cheap labor.
It's we're heading back 100 years. So if all the people who tell me that we don't need unions anymore because we just needed them 100 years ago, well, we're about to recreate 100 years ago. Michael, I appreciate you taking some time. I hope folks will check out the incredible reporting you do. TheGuardian.com is the website. We'll get links out on social media to Michael's articles. And I appreciate the time, man. Great stuff.
Thanks, Rick. Always a pleasure.
I got to take a quick break. Right back with your thoughts. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
We are AFGE, the American Federation of Government Employees. We represent 700,000 federal and D.C. government workers who are the vital threads of the fabric of American life. We support our nation's military. We take care of our nation's veterans. We protect our nation's borders. We respond to our nation's crises and natural disasters. We provide services to our nation's seniors. The American Federation of Government Employees. We work for America.
We are AFGE, the American Federation of Government Employees. We represent 700,000 federal and D.C. government workers who are the vital threads of the fabric of American life. We support our nation's military. We take care of our nation's veterans. We protect our nation's borders. We respond to our nation's crises and natural disasters. We provide services to our nation's seniors. The American Federation of Government Employees. We work for America.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So, another gun story. And look, there's always a bunch of gun stories. But this one caught my attention. Evidently, a high school kid, or a college kid. I'm sorry, 18-year-old college kid he was. Or is, I'm sorry. He didn't die, but, evidently, 18-year-old baseball player, plays for the University of Texas A&M University at Texarkana, sitting in the bullpen, minding his business, waiting for his chance to go out and pitch, and watching the game, shot in the chest. Just sitting in the bullpen, and I guess it's Texas, bullets flying everywhere. Why not? And the spokesperson for the Texarkana, Texas Police Department, his name's Sean Vaughn. I don't know who does that to a child, but Sean Vaughn said that, well, it's incredibly bad luck, just bad place, bad. Basically, it happens. Bad place, wrong time. Sorry. Now this is the same area where this area, I guess, this Spring Lake Park was filled with hundreds of Boy Scouts doing their had planned their camporama or scoutorama. Sadly, that had to be canceled because of shootings, and it's one of these things where what happened? Oh, well, just people shooting, it's people cars firing, driving by, shooting. Who knows? And my mind goes into this place of okay, when do we get the safety stuff? When does this because Texas has got more guns than anybody. I thought Texas with the more guns was going to be a safe place. And yet you look at the rising death rates in Texas. If that idea of, more guns, less laws, more people, with their right to guns would make us safer, Texas should be the safest place on earth, right? If that logic goes to play. But evidently not, because you can't sit in the bullpen without worrying about getting shot nowadays. And you look at some of the statistics, the death rate of the firearm death over the last 20 years has gone from right around 2,000 in 1999 up to 3,400 in 2017. I mean, we're talking a huge jump. So it's going up. Because we're saying, no, more people need more guns. And this idea of I'm going to stand my ground, and it's grabbing onto people. For instance, his name's Chris. He's a weather nut from Texas. His handle is iWeatherNet. He tweeted out he put out that a child just rang my doorbell. Folks, you do not ring doorbells in 2023. My 6 was loaded. Keep your kids away. And someone said, hey, what's wrong with you? Are you willing to shoot someone just because they had the audacity to ring your doorbell? And he responded to this person by going, I'm not blanking around. He used the F word. I can't say that. And then after some blowback, he then goes into a much more in-depth rant about how it's a bad idea to let your kids go out and ring doorbells. This isn't 1972, he says. That this person was looking for their kitten. He says, I'm so impatient. I feel bad because I wanted her. I warned her that I might pull her hair if they rang my doorbell again. She started crying. And you go, what is wrong with this person? Who a kid comes to the door going, I'm looking for my cat, and he's going to pull her hair. If you ring the doorbell, he's going to shoot you. What is wrong? What is wrong with people? And he finishes it up by saying, please teach your kids to stay away from doorbells. Is that the nation we want? Because on the other side of the door is some curmudgeon, some grumpy old man with a gun who's just fetishizing shooting somebody on the other side. Is this who we've become? My goodness. But we're going to make laws to where when he does shoot somebody, that stand your ground laws might be a defense. Because they're saying that there might be a defense for the guy who shot the kid through the door. He was standing his ground. He was protecting his castle. I don't know what from what. But does this not bother you? And how much worse does it get? And when do I have to start shooting somebody just because you looked at me funny? Or the other way around? We need some sanity. We need some leadership. Sadly, not a lot of either. Want to hear your thoughts? Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1886. That was the day that workers throughout the United States walked off their jobs in a coordinated, planned effort and demanded the 8-hour day. What made this strike truly revolutionary was that the workers were not asking for reduced pay for reduced hours. They wanted their pay level to stay the same. Chicago labor activist Alan Parsons explained this that March for the Chicago Daily News, saying, quote, "The movement to reduce the work hours is intended by its projectors to give a peaceful solution to the difficulties between capitalists and laborers. I have always held that there were two ways to settle this trouble, either by peaceable means or violent methods. Reduced hours, or 8 hours, is the peace offering. Fewer hours mean more pay. Reduced hours is only the measure of economic reform which consults the interests of the laborers as producers, which can only be acquired by possessing and consuming a larger share of their own project. This would diminish the profits of the exploiters." That first day of May, tens of thousands took to the streets in Chicago, and an estimated 300,000 protested across the nation, marching for the 8-hour day. The strike met with early success, but then 3 days later, an unknown person threw a bomb at a workers' rally in Chicago's Haymarket Square. The government crackdown against the 8-hour movement was quick and harsh. 8 men stood trial in Chicago for the bombing. 4 were martyred despite a lack of evidence tying them to the bomb. But the idea of the 8-hour day was not so easily crushed. It spread not only in the United States, but across the world. Now, more than a century later, May Day, this day, is the International Workers' Holiday. Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com.
When public officials get themselves mired in the muck of corruption, they can always count on Senator Ted Cruz to issue a moral judgment. If the offender is a Democrat, he pronounces the corruption inexcusably grotesque. If it's a Republican, he wails that the offender is the victim. For example, Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas was recently caught, yet again, butt deep in judicial immorality, taking hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of freebies from a Texas real estate baron who has both a partisan and corporate interest in Thomas's court rulings. So, Cruz to the rescue. "No judicial impropriety here," he squawks, "for this is nothing but a diabolical plot by Democrats to smear poor Clarence." But Thomas is busy smearing himself, so Dems can just take the advice of Woodrow Wilson. Never attempt to murder a man who's committing suicide. From the start of his court tenure, Thomas has been a shameless seeker of personal gain, tucking untold sums from untold sources in the inner pockets of his judicial robes. He learned to hide his corruption in 2004 when he actually reported taking pricey gifts from a special interest, which got him widely condemned. So he reformed. No, he didn't quit taking gimmies, he just quit disclosing them. Thomas is a supreme grifter, but sadly he's not alone. Many recent justices have fallen from the pedestal of judicial integrity, cozying up to the moneyed interests. Gifts aside, we now have a hyper-partisan right-wing Republican majority taking their judicial opinions from those same interests, turning America's unelected third branch of government into an autocratic, plutocratic political agency. Then they wonder why their public approval rating and legitimacy are in the ditch. This is Jim Hightower saying, since they won't reform themselves, we must do it for them. To help, go to fixthecourt.com.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So, International Workers' Day, May Day, and I look at what's going on in France, and you know, you've got the union there saying, what, 2.5 million people out in the streets, protesting the rise of the retirement age from 62 to 64, which nobody's thrilled with. But as one person reminded me, this isn't just about the rise in retirement age. This isn't about that. It's about democracy. It's about, people were never really consulted on. This was never put out to the people to say, look, this was done unilaterally. And this is why I think a lot of people are even more upset than the fact that they're screwing with their pension system and not taxing the very wealthy and all that other stuff. So on this International Workers' Day, a big outpouring. I'm here to share some thoughts on what's going on there and why it's important, why we should be paying attention. I've asked John Logan to come talk with us. John's a professor and the director of labor and employment studies at San Francisco State University. John, thanks for taking time for us.
Hi, Rick. Glad to be on.
So, you couple million people out in the streets in France. It actually did make it into U.S. news a little bit, a little blurb on page 7 of the newspaper, but it got a little something.
Yeah, no, it's a remarkable demonstration. And as you know, this has been going on for weeks and weeks and weeks. That they've had hundreds of thousands and millions of people, not just in Paris. I mean, huge demonstration today in Paris, but in cities all over the country. And as you said, I mean, the immediate issue is the raising of the retirement age from 62 to 64. The original proposal was 65. They lowered it to 64. And again, as you said, Macron, the president of France, has been determined to push this through. He says there's no alternative. People are living longer, demographic changes. We need, the projections are that the pension system will lose 10 billion a year for the next 10 years. And so we have to do this. And, people in the unions, people on the left say, no, there are alternatives. The amount of money to keep the pension system as it is, to keep it solvent, is actually not that great. And as you said, by having a fairer tax system, for having the very rich in France to pay their fair share, it could easily be dealt with in a number of different ways. But also, as you said, I mean, there's the issue of how this has come about. And, Macron is actually in a very weak position. This is a very unpopular reform with the general public who sympathize with the protesters. And even politically, he's had to invoke special constitutional measures in order to get this through. Not taking it before the lower legislative body, the assembly, because it wasn't certain that he would have sufficient support to get it through there. So it is law now, but there have been previous cases. The protesters, the unions have said they're not backing down. They're going to continue to protest, huge protests today. They're going to continue to escalate. And there have been previous examples of French governments backing down after the fact. Once, France as a whole, and I know this sounds like a little bit of a cliche, but it is actually very, very true. The French elite, the political elite, the economics elite, are very much still haunted by the specter of May 1968 in Paris, when workers and students got together and nearly caused a revolution. And major concessions were made to workers in the wake of those protests in May 1968. And so every time they see protests like this, and the French are very good at getting hundreds of thousands and sometimes millions of people out in the street to protest, that is at the back of their mind. They said, oh, could this really get out of control? Yep. Are we actually facing a situation where, our positions are threatened by this? So, we don't know how it's going to end yet. Say public opinion at the moment is on the side of the demonstrators. And, as I said to you, before we come on air, French unions and French workers have built up this sort of fairly well-developed and, welfare system that they think of as being, basic rights. And, now they're being told, no, we're changing the rules of the game. And again, it's a very broad generalization, but, when people come to think of certain things as rights and then you take them away, there's nothing that sort of energizes people more. I mean, there are certain things, of course, that Americans think of as basic rights, but, if only we could think, get American unions and American workers to think of retiring with dignity at age 62 as a fundamental right, and, to be able to mobilize people in terms of those. And it's, it's an interesting thing. People look at union membership in France, which is officially very, very low. I mean, at US levels, and they think, wow, only 5-6% of French workers are members of unions. But on the other hand, over 90% of French workers are covered by collective agreements because of the system of sectoral bargaining. But, both of those figures a little bit misleading. I won't go into it in great detail, but the 5-6% actually really refers to union activists rather than union members. I mean, even the word means something different from what we would understand as the meaning of a union member. So again, imagine the U.S. or many other countries had 5-6% of workers were activists within their unions. I mean, that's very significant base in which you can mobilize. The 90% too sounds wonderful. 90% plus people covered by collective agreements, and it is good, but it's not as good as it sounds. I mean, so often these agreements only really establish basic minimum conditions, and what really happens depends on the strength of organization at the company and at the workshop level, at the workplace level. So, it's a sort of mixed situation, but, certainly, as I say, the French, they introduced the 35-hour work week in the 90s, 98, and then again in 2000. And, there've been repeatedly efforts to weaken that. And again, it's not as good as the idea that people in France work far less than people in other European countries is a little bit misleading. But they do have that legislation, huge demonstrations against it. Same again, when the attempt to introduce sort of neoliberal labor market reforms to make it easier for companies to hire and fire workers. I mean, one thing about France and other countries in Europe too is once you're hired as a full-time employee, it's actually quite difficult to fire you. So when you get these big transnational corporations, manufacturing corporations, tech corporations, whoever it might be, and they're making global layoffs. They're getting rid of tens of thousands of workers sometimes. It's far easier for them to lay off workers in the United States than it is in France, and so that's usually what happens. So they will fight to the death to maintain, certain things that they've come to think of as, basic rights and, being treated with sort of basic human dignity. And, it's a combination of the unions are very heavily involved in these demonstrations, socialists, people on the left, but it's actually quite a broad spectrum of French society now that's participating. Some of the people who are known as the Yellow Vest, who participated in these very widespread protests against the rising cost of fuel a few years ago. And, sometimes are thought as being part of the populist right. But, they too, have joined with the protests. And so there's a great deal of real anger towards the Macron government. And as I said, his position is actually quite weak. So we don't know how this is going to play out yet.
Yeah. No, it's interesting for me because you bring up the Yellow Vest folks that are I view as the right. And of course, the labor unions there are more the left, and that there are commonalities there. And I keep saying the same thing about here in the U.S. The way that we reunite this country is in the workplace. We bring them back together, fight for better wages, hours, conditions, and win things. You said 1968 was the year that they remember. There are a lot of people alive who still remember that and can pass that along. And hey, we fought for things, we made things better. We aren't going to lose this. We got to get out the pitchforks. We're going to get the pitchforks out, and we don't have that here in this country. We've been sold this idea of hooray for me and the heck with everyone else. Greed is good. The one who dies with the most toys wins. And that doesn't lead to hundreds of thousands of people taking to the streets to fight against raising the retirement age. Last I saw, they want to take it into the 70s. It doesn't equate to the same things.
No, absolutely not. And as you said, I mean, Americans, typically work longer, are dying earlier. And this is the thing in France too. I mean, like, one of the original proposals, I mean, I think it's actually still in the law that went into effect, is that you have to work 43 years in order to qualify for a full state pension. I mean, the full state pension is very generous compared with the US. I mean, this is another thing. It's not only that they get to retire earlier, but as I said before, they get to retire with dignity. I mean, the pension is, far, far better than, what most American workers, who have got to look forward to after retirement, particularly, non-union workers in the private sector in the US. Many are facing, very, very precarious economic position in their old age. So
no, they're screwed, John. You could say it.
Yeah.
The working class of this country, moving forward, is screwed come retirement age, because there are no defined benefit pensions for people hardly anymore, and those defined contributions they told us were going to make us all millionaires. The average is about $18,000 per person, not a luxurious retirement. So people aren't going to be able to retire, and we're told that that's normal on a certain screwy level.
Yeah. And in France, I mean, they point out, which we know, but there it becomes a reason for people to get out in the streets and to protest and to demonstrate and to say, no, you're not going to do this. They know that the people who would be most adversely affected by these changes are people who have been working in manual labor and blue-collar jobs, who entered the workforce earlier, who have been working for longer, and who,
their bodies are shot.
Exactly. Expect less, years in retirement, even as it is.
Yeah.
And so, that it does seem sort of in that perspective, fundamentally unfair. And, I think that, I mean, if, we desperately need, someone, whether it be Joe Biden or someone else, to adopt a more stronger economic populist message, and said, as you said, the working class in this country is, already, we have these sort of vision of the future of work presented by, the Howard Schultz and Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk, that is based basically on low wages, expendable workers, algorithmic management, and no independent voice. And, it's going to be a complete disaster for most American workers, and we're really at the point where this is a national crisis. And, we need to have demonstrations on the scale that we see in Paris and other cities.
Yeah. We need all of that, but the only thing we see people organizing around is who's going to what bathroom. It's insane to me. You're listening to the Rick Smith Show with John Logan. John's a professor and director of labor and employment studies at San Francisco State University. I want to change gears real quick because I only got a couple minutes left. The Ben and Jerry's organizing campaign. I talked about this the other day. Of course, Ben and Jerry's. Right. Of course, Ben and Jerry's would say yes, come and organize our workforce. Yeah. This is what I would hope the model of the future could be. Yes. Tell me, what are your thoughts?
Well, I think there's two striking things. I mean, as I said to you before we started, I was actually up in Burlington and met with members of the organizing committee there, and with the lead organizer, Becca Mendelsohn, who's like this sort of fantastic University of Vermont senior. And it has the same feel as a lot of these other organizing campaigns that we're seeing, at Starbucks, at REI, at Apple, at Trader Joe's. It's sort of young people who are really powerfully attracted to the idea of organizing their own workplace. They don't really know, most of them have had no previous involvement with labor activism. I mean, they're young people who have worked non-union jobs and low-wage jobs in the service sector, but there's something very powerful and very appealing about the idea of organizing your own workplace. They're really driven to do it. And, in that respect, that is very, very hopeful, I think, because, for them, organizing is not something that's done to you, it's something you do yourself. They don't know much about the labor establishment, probably don't even care that much, but, they really want to organize their own workplace. And, it's just absolutely terrific. They're so refreshing to me. Second thing is that, Ben & Jerry's which, as you said, is owned by Unilever, one of the biggest, food and cosmetics companies in the world. But they have decided to embrace the so-called fair election principles, which were developed by veteran labor organizer Richard Bensinger, and also promoted during the Starbucks Workers United. Starbucks, of course, did not adopt the fair election principles, went down a different route, firing dozens.
The union buster route.
Yeah, exactly. But, so even although this is just starting at the flagship store, 40 workers, 39 of whom immediately signed union cards in Burlington, Vermont, it's the first major corporation to sign the fair election principles and say, yes, we workers deserve a fair choice. We will not bully them. We will not intimidate them. We will not play legal games to prevent them from bargaining if they decide to form a union. And finally, the other thing I'll say is, the important thing about campaigns like Ben & Jerry's, again, it's like Starbucks, it's like Trader Joe's, it's like Apple, these are iconic companies. What happens there makes for great media coverage, great social media coverage. This is how young people find out about these campaigns, how they're excited about them, how they're inspired by them. So, already we've had really good stories, in Washington Post, Lauren Gurley, Noam Scheiber in the New York Times, Josh Idelson in Bloomberg, and on and on and on. Ben & Jerry's, everyone knows Ben & Jerry's. You have a very direct relationship with companies like this. So, even although the number of workers at the moment is quite small, I think it has the potential to spread. In fact, it immediately spread to a cafe, which has 4 outlets in the Burlington area called Black Cap, which is about 2 stores down from Ben & Jerry's. They heard, oh, they're organizing at Ben & Jerry's. We should do the same thing.
That's contagious.
Here. Yeah, exactly. And, this is the sort of dynamic, if we are going to have a sort of meaningful union revival in this country, I think it is going to depend on a lot of this sort of self-organizing dynamic. And I think a lot of it is going to be led by young people who, as I said, are strongly attracted to the idea of organizing their own workplace. So it's just, it's a fabulous campaign. We'll see how it goes. Hopefully it will spread. They have a union called Scoopers United. So, there's no reason why that should just be Ben & Jerry's. That could be anyone.
I'm all in favor of it. Look, if you're gonna make my Cherry Garcia with union labor, I am all in favor of it. Chunky Monkey as well. I'm looking forward to it. But John, I appreciate the time and the thoughts. Great stuff. Look forward to having you back again real soon.
Nice to be on, Rick. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Look, I'm thrilled at some of these campaigns, and as I've said before, the young people are going to be the future. Want to hear your thoughts? Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Quick break. Right back. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1886. This was the day that began events in Chicago that would make May 1st the most important day on the calendar for the labor movement across the world. The sun shone brightly in Chicago that day. 90,000 workers took to the streets to protest for the 8-hour day. Nearly half of them were on strike, and the rest were marching in support of the demands of working people. Many of the marches had a festive air, with music playing and banners waving. Across the country, estimates of as many as 500,000 workers participated in the walkout. Labor was on the march. But then, just 3 days later, striking workers were gunned down by police at Chicago's McCormick Reaper plant. The next night, police marched on a workers' rally that was about to wrap up at Haymarket Square. An unknown person threw a bomb into the police ranks, and the police responded by shooting wildly, striking protesters and their own men. The police crackdown against union leaders and suspected radicals was fierce. 8 men were rounded up and blamed for the crime. Despite a lack of any evidence tying them to the bombing, 4 of the accused were hung. The Haymarket Martyrs became international heroes of the labor movement. On May 1st, 1890, labor leaders across Europe and the United States declared May Day the workers' holiday. In cities across the world, tens of thousands marched for the 8-hour day. Now, more than 125 years after the fateful week in Chicago, May Day remains International Labor Day. Today, a monument stands at the site of Haymarket, and each year, labor leaders from across the world travel to Chicago to visit and commemorate the site. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, and follow us on the Twitters at Labor History in 2. Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out our website, thericksmithshow.com. Questions, comments, something on your mind, email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. So for our Minnesota listeners, evidently a lawmaker, Cal is his name, Cal Barr, Senator Calvin Cal. Evidently, there was a Zoom call. There was evidently a vote being taken via Zoom. And Cal, at about the 6-minute, 43-second mark, he can be seen shirtless, lying down with the Schoolhouse Rock, I'm just a Bill background. I'm not quite sure why this is a story, other than this is our media, not actually saying anything, other than, a guy was probably, in bed, and I got to go to work, and let me quick get the YouTube on here, or get the Zoom meeting up. They didn't talk about what the bill was. They didn't talk about how he voted. It was just that he was caught shirtless for a couple of seconds. And I don't care if he's a Republican or not. I don't get it. I don't get why it's a story. Sorry. It's one of those things. It's just, we're upset about nonsense. The fact that there are so many other issues out there, that this was a Fox News story that came into my feed, is insane to me. Now, look, if he had some kind of, we're going to be banning, shirtless people in public, and then I go, okay, it makes sense. I see the reason for the story, but there isn't any of that. I was just telling my son the other day that when we were in gym class, it was shirts versus skins. We didn't have cute little pennies to put on so that we could be red team or blue team. The fat kid always was on the skins team, and it made him feel bad, and we got over that. I don't get what has. I guess I'm struggling with this. Why this is a story? Why is this a story? So for my friends in Minneapolis, if you've got a reason why this is a story, I gotta know. I gotta know what Cal has done other than being seen for a moment shirtless. It's not like he was pantless. Was not like Cal's name was Carol and she was topless. That would be a story, but for I think much better reasons. I don't know. It's going to be an interesting week. There are lots of things going on this week that lots of organizing, lots of the potential writers strike going to happen. We will be talking about all of that, focusing a lot more on the Supreme Court's upcoming decision in this to overturn the Chevron deference. There's a lot going on, a lot that's important, a lot that affects our day-to-day existence. And it's the kind of stuff that I think we should be organizing around to fix, as opposed to, organizing to destroy. As my grandfather always said, any idiot with a hammer can tear down a house. It takes a craftsman to build one. Let's be craftsmen. Let's take off the red hats and the blue hats and put on a hard hat and get to work, because we got a lot of it to do. If you miss any portion of the program, download the podcast. Wherever you get your podcasts, you will find ours. You got thoughts, questions, comments, something I said got under your skin, made you mad? I definitely want to hear that. Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Thanks so much for tuning in. We'll see you back here next time.
You've been listening to The Rick Smith Show. Email Rick at rick@thericksmithshow.com. Until next time, this has been The Rick Smith Show, where working people